Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have with us Dr. Javed Younas. We're very excited for this talk. Thank you so much for being here. I would just like to start with introducing our speaker. So he is currently a professor at the American University of Sharjah, and before this, he held a faculty position at the Central Michigan University, USA. His major research interests lie in the areas of international economics, development economics, economics of security, and applied econometrics. And his work has been published widely in a number of reputable journals, including Applied Economics and Oxford Economic Papers, as well as European Journal of Political Economy. Today, he will be discussing conflicts and child gender at birth in the context of Pakistan. Before I invite him to start his talk, I would just like to go over some of the house rules. He will have about 40 to 45 minutes to speak. And during this time, if anybody has a question, you can use the Q&A function to post your questions. And then in the end, we'll have about 15 minutes dedicated for the question and answer session. And during this time, if you would wish to sort of ask your question yourself, then please use the raise hand function. We will unmute you so that you can ask your question live. And with this, I will request Dr. Javed Younas to please, the floor is all yours. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Hamna, are you going to stop sharing your screen? Or
yes, I.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So I've stopped screen sharing now, and you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, thank you. I do see my co-author is also online with us. So good. So here you go. Let me. Okay. Let me maximize. Okay. Okay, I can see all of you on my side, one side of the screen. So is that okay? Or what?
Yes, and we can see your slides also. So everything seems good.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much, Lahore School of Economics, Dr. Naveed, Dr. Azam, Dr. Farah, Dr. Hamna, Mariam, for inviting me, for presenting my work. This is an ongoing work for the last 1.5 years or about 2 years. So we will truly appreciate your comments so we could really make some further improvements in the paper. Okay. So as you can see from the title, the paper is about the relationship between conflicts and child gender at birth. Okay. So before I go into the details about my paper, I would like to give you some facts which at times are misunderstood. One is, there is a common misunderstanding that women are weaker physically. Women are weaker than men, right? Although it depends on how we define physical strength, medical science tells us that women are biologically stronger than men. They have better immune system. They are less susceptible to diseases, infections, and they have less cardiovascular problems. Okay. Now, like from the time female fetus is conceived in the womb and the birth till they die, the medical science tells us that women are biologically stronger than men. Now, if you look at the data, we see that infant mortality rate for male children is higher than the infant mortality rate for the female children. On average, women live 4 years longer than men in Pakistan. Okay. So with this, some of the data, some statistics, I move on to my presentation. Okay. Now, this paper relates to the psychology and medical literature, which suggests that human sex at birth, human sex ratio at birth, is also subjected to some exogenous external shocks, such as earthquake, environmental toxins, political and social unrest, and economic recessions, financial problems, right? They can have an impact on child gender at birth. Okay. Now, the evidence from medical literature tells us that whenever we perceive some threat in the environment, like for example, we suddenly encounter with a large dog barking at us in the street, or we have to apply a brake suddenly while we're driving. So what happens in our body is that it sets an alarm in the hypothalamus region of our brain. And that hypothalamus region then activates adrenal glands, which are just on top of our kidney, right? And they release a number of hormones in our bloodstream, including the cortisol hormone, right? And cortisol hormone is known to be the stress hormone, which means that, okay, a certain level of cortisol is necessary to regulate our immune system, okay, and regulate our digestion system. But excessive amount of cortisol can actually interfere negatively with our immune system and with our reproduction system, right? As well as our digestive system in our body. Now, the tolerance to the stress and response to the stress depends on the genes formation, which means that overreaction and underreaction to the stress can also be defined by what kind of genes we have in our body, right? Some people remain cool with the stress in the environment, but some people react very, negatively and panically when they face the stress. And second is the life experience. What kind of life experience or traumatic event we have to go through in life, right? For example, life experience, as I explained before, that some kind of, child abuse, for example, one may have had in the childhood, or maybe financial problems, unemployment, especially the prolonged unemployment, for example, or some other factor, some political and social problems one faces in life, for example. Those are the life experience one can face in life, right? Now, and then the formation of primary sex ratio suggests that the chromosomes from male and the chromosome from female, they define the gender of a child at the time of conception, right? Now, the medical literature tells us that the Y chromosomes are weaker than the X chromosomes. And Y chromosomes define the male gender, while X chromosomes define the female gender, right? So there is a theory of sperm mortality, right? Which means that the sperms are able to fertilize the egg successfully. So there is a theory behind that. Medical science tells us that male, like Y chromosomes are weaker and X chromosomes are sturdier, right? So which means that the stress level, which causes the cortisol level to increase in our body, can have an effect on the motility of the sperms, right? So the Y chromosomes are more likely to dissipate due to the stress in the humans, right? especially when it comes from the male side. And second is the fetal origin hypothesis, right? And this suggests that for the fetal to survive and thrive in the womb, it has to have certain set of environment in which it exists, right? Now, male fetus requires better endowments, fetus endowments to thrive in the mother womb, better than the female fetus, right? So which means that some stress level can actually interfere with the development of male fetus more than the female fetus, okay? Which means there are, if intrauterine conditions are unfavorable to the fetus, then male fetus is more likely to die, and which may result in spontaneous abortions as a result, right? So it's basically fetus death, all right? So basically, exogenous shocks can happen either prior to conception or they can happen during pregnancy, okay? Now, these shocks can alter the primary sex ratio, which happens at the time of conception, or they can result in fetal losses. And the outcome is this, that we can see the secondary sex ratio at birth, whether a child is male or female, or it can affect the health of baby birth, right? Health of newborn at the time of birth, okay? Now, it is important to understand that we cannot observe, at least we do not have data to observe the primary sex ratio, because the primary sex ratio is defined at the time of conception. Within a day or two, that's what medical science tells us, the primary sex is determined. However, we get to know about the sex or gender of the child after about 15, 20 weeks through ultrasound or scanning, for example, right? And of course, we know for sure the gender of the child at the time of birth, okay? Now, this paper adds to the existing literature where there are very few papers that look at the effect of some external shocks, especially the conflicts and terrorism, during the pregnancy. And there is no paper as far as we know that look at the effect of terrorism prior to conception, right, on the child gender at birth. Now, we look at some preliminary correlation. Like for Pakistan, the male to female ratio is 0.52, right? In some papers, some studies, some data, it is reported to be a little bit more than that. In our sample, male to female ratio is 0.51. And if we look at the sample of women, pregnant women who experienced terrorist attacks in their region, in their area, prior to conception, for them, the ratio goes down to 0.4849, right? But those women who were pregnant but they did not experience attack prior to conception, for them, the ratio is 0.51, right? And this difference is statistically significant, right? Now, this is our paper. We want to see whether there is a causal relationship between exposure to terrorism prior to conception and a child's gender at birth, right? Okay. Now, why terrorism? Why not other conflicts? Okay. Terrorism is different. Whole objective of terrorists is to create and spread fear, attack civilians, and in passive combats also attack military and police personnel, right? And that is also counted as part of terrorism. And that is the case of Pakistan. So they make other people fear for their life. Their aim is not to kill as many people, but their aim is to spread as much panic, anxiety, and fear as they can, so that they can put pressure through public on the government to concede to their demands. Okay? So the terrorism is basically the use of violence or threat of using violence for attaining some political objective, right? Without political objective, an act of terrorism is just a crime, not a terrorism. Okay? So it's all about creating fear and panic, right? For taking some concession from the government. Now, the terrorism is different from conventional warfare or guerrilla acts or guerrilla warfares. Because in terrorism, the main targets are civilians. In conventional warfare, the main targets are forces. And the same goes for guerrilla warfare. And the conventional warfare is under some rules and regulations, which means that it prohibits enemy forces to attack the civilian population, right? Or civilian localities. So that's why terrorism is different. And second is, in case of Pakistan, terrorism has been a high frequency event, right? More than, like from 2001, more than 52,000, according to some reports, more than 52,000 people, civilian as well as have these attacks have been observed almost all over Pakistan. They are not only restricted to one area, but they are spread all over the country, right? Now, in order to attract and maintain the publicity, which is very necessary to generate widespread fear, the terrorists engage in dramatic events like hostage taking, like bombing, like armed attack, like suicide attacks, and so on and so forth. Okay, these are all tactics that are used by the terrorists, and they have been used widely in Pakistan and all over Pakistan, right? With some places a lot more than the others. And the terrorists try to make their attacks random so that they can spread fear across the larger masses, and so that they are not able to detect by the government agencies, police and military, right? So it is difficult to forecast for the military and the police to know that where the next attack is likely to happen. Yes, it is easy to forecast that, because terrorism is aimed at creating big havoc and panic and the fear, so they would target the places which are more populated, and which are high value targets. But it is difficult to forecast where and when. That is difficult. And second is, in Pakistan, the terrorism has caused lots of confusion, right? I mean, think about the political setup in Pakistan, especially between 2004 and 2014, right? The political parties were not decisive whether it was the Pakistan's war or it was some foreign war which was imposed on them. But thousands of civilians were killed. Thousands of military personnel and police personnel were killed. Infrastructure were damaged. But the political parties were debating during that period whether it was their war or it was someone else's war. So the government remained indecisive. Decision came, right, only when the attack on Army Public School occurred in 2014, December 2014. Then came unanimity. Before that, there was no clear counter-terrorism policy in practice in Pakistan, unfortunately. And then terrorism also causes overreaction by the government, right? Government escalates the fundings and it erects pickets and police checkposts all over the cities, right? As you can see, that has happened in Pakistan without having a real evidence whether erecting pickets and uh, checkposts all over the places do reduce terrorism, right? We do not have really any evidence about that. So, and then spending, and when more spending happens on security and so forth, then that means that we have a smaller pie that goes to education and health and so on. But once these spendings take into place, then it becomes very difficult to reduce those spendings, right? We never do this that, okay, let us go back and see whether we are more safe than before so that we can cut spending on security and then we can move this funding towards health and education. That doesn't really happen, as you know. And media sensation, right? During that period, during which we are looking at our analysis, during that period, media created lots of sensation. I think no other promoted the cause of terrorism like media did during that time. They aired the interviews of terrorist leaders. They showed the mutilated bodies of victims and terrorists. They conducted debates every night from 7 p.m. till 12 p.m., right? And they created so much of fear and panic because every one of us do watch TV, right? And and so on, right? Now, and also that longer this terrorism go on, right? Then it really tends to create the groups, strong groups and alliances. There are a number of domestic and foreign groups that are operating in Pakistan, and they have links in the neighboring countries, right? Now, those groups become stronger once they merge into each other, especially the smaller groups merge with the larger group, right? So it's just like multinational company, right? They take benefits from the specialization of each other, right? So they operate in different parts of the world. And that exactly happened in Pakistan. So all of these factors created an environment that was very stressful, full of anxiety and the panic in the country. Now, we'll look
So,
at the.
Dr. Younas, just wanted to flag that you have about 15 minutes left.
I have about 15 minutes left.
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay. Let me go quickly. Okay. So these are transient terrorist attacks in Pakistan. Okay. It's province wise and it's for the total country. And these are geographical distribution of armed conflict and bombings in Pakistan. They're all over the places. You can see that. Okay. And these are fatalities and injuries. So we have now the studies that the terrorism actually creates a lot of panic and fear, creates stress, anxiety, compared to other types of attacks. For example, cyber terrorism, which kills people, but the conventional terrorism has a lot of fear and panic, creates a lot of fear and panic. Okay, I will skip this part, right? The motivation, I already explained that. Okay, so we are taking basically insight from the medical and psychology literature, right? That tells us about what determines primary sex ratio and secondary sex ratio and how can stress interferes with the with these two ratios. Okay, so I will not really go into it because time is short. Okay, just very quickly, what we do here is we extract data on 11,331 live births and 1,757 fetal losses that were conceived between 2007 and 2012, right? And we use some other household characteristics, and that data comes from DHS, and we match it with the district level monthly terrorist events in Pakistan, and that data comes from GTD. And we also use district level controls, and we use district fixed effects, mother fixed effects, conception time fixed effects, and province fixed effects, and so on. And what we find is that terrorism induced stress prior to conception reduces the likelihood of male birth, right? And effect is positive for the number of female birth and negative for the male birth. And exposure to terrorist attacks increases the chances of fetal death, right? And the effect of terrorism on the size of newborn is not statistically significant, right? Just quickly the summary of the result. But now I will skip the literature review part. Uh, okay, data that we are finding. So our dependent variables, and we are using number of controls, right? For example, we are using individual level control, the birth order, inbreeding, smoking, age, multiple births, education, wealth, urban. These are all the parental controls, and the district level controls are the population size, income, employment, public service, effectiveness of public service, electricity durations, and education, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, okay. Now, our empirical design, right, is this. So basically, we exploit variation in two categories. One is for finding the identification effect, right? Identify the effect of terrorism on the child gender. One is there were women who were exposed to terrorism prior to conception, right? And there were women who were conceived, but they were not exposed. They did not expose to terrorism prior to conception. And those who were conceived, or those, and out of those who were exposed to terrorism prior to conception, the degree of exposure to terrorism is different or can be different, right? And also we look at the sibling for the same mother who gave birth over this 5 year of time in our data, who gave birth when they were exposed terrorism and when they were not exposed to terrorism. So basically siblings exposure to terrorism, right? And then second variation comes from the varying number of attacks across districts, right? That is the second variation that comes in our data, right? For the identification purpose. So basically it's a diff and diff regression. Now we have district level analysis and we have individual birth analysis. Now, what we see here is for the district level analysis, what we see for the total births, we do not find a significant effect. But for the male birth, we find the negative effect, but it's not statistically significant. For the female birth, we find the positive effect in all the regressions, right? And I want to point out that we control for a number of time variant factors, as well as the fixed effects at the mother conception, year of conception, and province and the districts. Okay, and these are the individual birth effect, which is that 1 if child is male, 0 if it is female, right? So what we see here is that terrorism reduces the probability of having a male child, right? And we see some, we see some non-linearity also in the data, and we see that the effect really dissipates after some time, or diminishes after some time, or after some attacks. Now we use terror dummy, we see the similar effect, and we use terror log, or we use casualties. Although the casualties are subject to measurement error, but we still find that using different aspects of terrorism, we find a negative similar effect. Okay, now the effect of terrorism on sex at birth, we can see the district level effect and we can see the individual level effect. And what we do here is that we see whether there is an effect during the pregnancy, right, on the gender. So we include the attacks that happened in the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, right? All right. Now, one thing I want to clarify is this, that basically how we match the data, right? For example, if mother gave birth in December, right? So we count total 40 weeks of pregnancy. So we assume that the birth happens after 40 weeks, full pregnancy, right? Period. And then we go back and look at the attacks that happened in February, right? Assuming that she conceived in the month of March, okay? I'll come to that, when you have any question, or any one of you. Now, and then we know that terrorism is relatively frequent in Pakistan, right? There is hardly any district in Pakistan, hardly any district that hasn't really witnessed a terrorist attack during our time period. But that is also true, that some districts have faced much more terrorism than the other districts, especially in KP or Karachi or in the Balochistan area, for example. Therefore, and look at this data, this shows that the world terror, total terror attacks in the world, right, starting from 2000 till 2014, and then terror attacks in Pakistan, right? So there are about 200 countries in the world. But still, what we see here is that, for example, in this time, right, Pakistan faced about 15% of the total, 12 to 15% of the total world attacks, right? Now, what we do here is that we take the monthly average for each district of attacks, right? Monthly average of attacks in each district. And then we create a dummy for the district that faced more attacks, more than the average, that is 1, and less than the average, that is 0. Okay. And then also we understand that there is like unobserved heterogeneity, especially for the individual mothers. Without controlling for that, right, our results are biased, right? Therefore, we track sibling, right, and using the mother fist effects, right? So that way our data sample size reduces, but I think it's a pretty neat way of finding the causal results. Now we look at then the terror attack, right, in the district that faced more than the average terror attack in our sample, and we see that the probability of male child goes down, right, and the size of the coefficient is larger than the before. And by using the mother fixed effects, we also see the similar effect, and look at the size is also larger than before, right? And we are using linear probability models, so because they're easy to solve and easy to interpret, okay? So second is fetal losses, right? Which means that terrorism can also alter the secondary sex ratio, right? Um, Therefore, we also look at the effect on the fetal losses as a result of terrorism, right? Therefore, we track 1,416 mothers who had fetal losses, but they also gave live births over the 5 years of period, okay? So it reduces our sample a bit, but again, I think it's a nicer way to find the causal effect. Now you can see that terrorism preconception, right, resulted in the fetal losses, so it's positive effect, right? And then we look at the mother fixed effect regression. Then we can see that terrorism preconception results in what? The fetal losses, and the effect is larger than the regressions that did not take into account the fetal losses. Yeah, it's a mother fixed effect.
So, Dr. Younas, there are a couple of clarificatory questions. Should we take them?
Yeah,
if
sure.
that's okay with us. So Mehreen Mahmood is asking that, can you say a little about why we are seeing different effects on the likelihood of male and female birth? Because one would think that perhaps the coefficient on the male birth would be 1 minus the coefficient on the female birth. So that's one comment. And then another comment is by Farah, and she's asking, is it possible, do you think that terrorism also reduces gender selection? In which case families may be having more births to term when the child is a girl. So this might be worth checking in this setting.
Right. For the first question, I don't think that is a problem, right? I mean, we have dummy here for our dependent variable, right? Which is one, like, I think question relates to this, right?
Table 1. It relates to table 1, their question, yeah.
Here, this one? Okay. Up here. Okay, this, okay. So here in this table, we are using, so basically this is the district level effect. So our main regressions are the individual birth effect, right? So here we sum all the births that happen at the district, and we take the log of our dependent variable, right? So here we are showing the total birth and the male birth, but we do not find any significant effect up here. But here we find for the female birth, for all sorts of, no matter how we define our terrorism variable, we find the positive effects, right? So I really do not see that how the coefficient on terrorism would be different up here, or I'm not sure at this point, right? But
yeah.
But the other question about that question was about the female,
yeah, she was asking if it's possible for these table 1 effects to So could we see the same effects if, for instance, terrorism reduces gender selection? So in that case, families would be having more births to term when the child is a girl. So this might be something that's worth checking.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But I don't know if we can, the gender selection, we can have data on that, right? There is a limitation on that, right? I mean, yes, we know that there is a bias for boys and against girls, right? In our country and in other countries, especially in South Asia. But I don't know how we can test that unless we have data on that, right? But what I can tell you is this, that if we looked at the sex ratio at birth, from 1960 in Pakistan, from 1960 till about 1995 or so, that sex ratio at birth is flat. So the most of the data that I've seen, that sex ratio at birth is flat. After 1995, there is a spike in the sex ratio, a sudden spike, and then there is a drop, but then average is still higher than before 1995. The drop happens around 2000 or more, like 2005 or so, but the average is still more than what we see before 1995. So that is male to female ratio at birth. Does that point to some, the abortion, sex selective abortions? I don't know. But what I know is this, that ultrasounds machines, X-ray machines became more common around this time period, right? And then around around, you go to, inner part of Lahore or other cities, even in the streets, you will find clinics, maternity clinics, or all that. I don't know. Okay. Uh, Other questions, Hamna?
Yes, there is one more question by Rashid Javed, but this is with regards to your second set of estimations that you were showing on fetal losses. And he's asking, do you control for birth spacing among siblings during your fetal death estimations?
Yes, we do. We have birth order. That's right.
So I guess we can move on. There are no more questions at this point. And also you have about a couple of more minutes, like 2-3 more minutes.
Thank you. 2 more minutes, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we see the fetal losses, and then adverse shocks may scar the survivor, which means that the shocks before and during pregnancy can actually result in poor health of the newborn. But it may also make survivor healthier. It's like positive selection, right? Which is that more attacks, only those fetus survive that are healthier, for example. So which means that health at birth, we may not find a statistically significant effect because one effect is positive, other is negative, right? So we may not find a statistically significant effect on the health of the newborn at birth, right? But there is a paper by Valenti 2015 who finds that in the case of Nepalese, the conflicts, he finds no significant effect on the health of the newborn, right? So what we did is that we look at the effect of terrorism on the birth size of the newborn, right? We do not have data on the weight of the child, right, of the newborn. Part of the reason is that many women also deliver at home, right? So we do not have data in that case, but we do have data on the birth size. But in there, we do not really find any effect, although the sign is negative, which is as we expected, but we do not find a significant effect, right? Uh, on the health in terms of the birth size of the newborn. Okay. Some caveats and our responses, which means that this says that terrorism attacks could be subject to some measurement errors, which is that the government may just inflate the number of terrorist attacks in the country to just suppress opposition, or it may just understate the actual number of attacks to show that terrorism is not a big problem in the country. So that can happen. But in either way, so basically it can result into like attenuation bias in the fixed fact regressions, right? Even if we consider this point as valid in our data, that means that our results are conservative. Second is, we're assuming that all the pregnant women complete their gestational period of 40 weeks, right? Which means that we go back, so when birth happens, right? The month of birth, and we go back and count 40 weeks, and we then use the prior conception attack before the 40-week backward from the time of birth. So, but there is a possibility that some women, deliver before this 40 weeks period, right? But in any case, all the women who were conceived, they experienced attacks before they got conceived. Okay. And then there is a possibility that that a pregnant woman may move from one district to another district, like safer district. Although the migration is not a big problem in Pakistan, once a female is married and lives in a district, it is, many studies do suggest that internal migration is not a big issue, right? A big problem in Pakistan. But still, to the extent that the pregnant woman moves to safer places or safer district, right? Still, it shows that our results are conservative. Okay. Now, which means that at the time when she conceived, where she lived. Okay. Now, so discussion some. So, considering that our results are valid, there is an implication for selective abortion of female fetuses, right? So, which means that if terrorism results in the likelihood of more female births, right, then the parents who desire to have a male child may engage in this abortive practice, right? Like abortion of female fetus. Or it may also increase the fertility until the parents reach the desired number of boys, if that is the objective. Now, male shortages, and remember that many of our males also go to other countries, especially in the Gulf countries, right? They work there and they go there by themselves without the family. Family stays back, right? So the male shortages can contribute to violence by inducing domestic terrorism in developing countries, especially in those countries that have weak institutions, right? I have paper on this with Todd Sandler in 2017 in JCR. And also in the population with low sex ratio, women are less likely to marry or stay married or give marital births, So that has implications on our demographics. And declining fertility is also associated with the high probability of divorce and higher probability of labor force participation by male heads and the migration and so on. But if the fetal endowments, necessary fetal endowments, right, are required to survive, right, and they differ by sex, then I think we need to better understand whether these differences translate into dissimilar human capital outcome in adulthood, right? Which means that the children who faced the women who faced terrorism and they gave birth to male or female, right? I think it's worth researching in the future, for example, that whether it translates into different human capital accumulation in the adulthoods for those children whose mother faced such such attacks and stresses, for example. There are things to consider in our paper, and we are still working on that, like internal migration, some spillover effects, or stillbirth versus miscarriages, and sex ratio at birth, and so on, and primary sex ratio, right? Sex ratio at death and primary sex ratio. We are working on some of these factors. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting talk, Dr. Younas. And we have a couple of questions. So Amar Anwar was asking that, so his question was with regards to sample selection, and he was asking that if most of the terrorist attacks are concentrated around KPK and Balochistan, where we also know that the healthcare system is generally or on average of poorer quality, and usually nutritional deficiencies are also more prevalent in those areas. So do you think that some of your results that you're seeing might also be explained by these differences in quality, and would you like to comment on that?
And that's a good point. That's a very good point. So we think our data is pretty representative. We have 117 districts in our data set, and there are 154 districts in Pakistan. So our data does not include districts in Azad and Jammu Kashmir, FATA, right? FATA is now part of the KP, but not during the time of our study. And also the restricted military and protected areas are not included in our data set. But inclusion of variant of controls and the fixed effects at the district and the mother level and so on, I think can account for those factors that my friend is asking. But that's a good point. I think what we can do is that we can look at, so one we did is this, that we looked at the district that experienced a lot more terrorism than the other districts. But another thing we can do is that we can look at the effect in province-wise, right? Districts in KP and in Punjab and other provinces.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Younas. There's another question by Mariam Haroon, and she was asking if you can comment on any potential coping mechanisms that you might have observed, or perhaps you might have done any heterogeneity analysis based on which you have some insights for households as to what sort of coping mechanisms they are using when they, so amongst the households that are exposed to terrorism.
Okay, so your voice broke a little bit in between, but what I understood is that the coping mechanism by the households who faced such shocks,
Yes.
right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. You know, um, uh, terrorism and such stresses in the environment. First thing is that stop watching TV, right? Second is that, the thing is that terrorism is correlated with other economic factors like, like with unemployment and decline in GDP and other economic activities and so on, right? Which means that the stresses that coming from terrorism is actually a stress that is coming from many factors at the same time, right? So, which means that, okay, the, there are many things I think one can do at the individual level, at the community level, and at the government level, right? I think better, basically, the stress is that when you, okay, when you talk it with the other peer stress factor, right? But there is also a possibility when you talk with other people, it might actually increase your stress factor, right? There are trauma centers. I know there are trauma centers in KP, and how effective they are and how reachable they are to the community, I'm not too sure about that. But I think we need to efforts, some conservative at the level of government as well as at the level of community engagement events. They can be kind of counseled, right? They can be counseled effectively. So counseling, I guess, is the main thing up here. Right? And at the government level, of course, such efforts cannot really be done. Hamna?
Can you
Hamna?
hear me? Yes. Yes, your
Yes,
voice
I
started breaking
yes.
up for me. Can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes, Amna, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Younas.
No, I can hear you.
That's great. Thank you so much for a very, very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed this, and I was not at all aware of this medical literature and what it says about, the male chromosome versus the female chromosome and all of those things. So I was fascinated to hear that. And thank you so much for being here. I would also like to mention that this happens to be the last last ADE seminar for 2020. So I would really like to thank everyone for being here, for always participating from the Lahore School as well as our audience from elsewhere. So thank you so much, everyone, for your support and for your presence.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Younas, for joining us today.
Thank you, Javed. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations on
Thank
a
you.
successful seminar series.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon.